Well, hi and welcome to Coffee with Phil. Welcome to the podcast and this series called Wrestling with God. In this series, we're going to unpack the story that may be known to you, Jacob, as he wrestles with God beside the brook Jabbok. And I'm going to share with you the journey that God's got me on as I wrestle with Him, as I swap sweat with Jesus and go through the process of fighting for the covenant promise. We're going to look at Emmanu-el. We're going to look at Emmanu-el. We're going to look at Israel. So come on the journey as we wrestle with God. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my studio. Welcome to Coffee with Phil. I am Phil, and I am drinking coffee. You won't be surprised by that, because if you're a regular listener, you'll know that in the afternoon I like to go and make myself a gorgeous flat white, home-roasted beans, made by myself here, and I like to come back into the studio, and I like to spend time with you. And it is a joy. It is a pleasure. I'm enjoying this. I've got some stuff to share with you about this season, because we're in a podcast season called Wrestling with God. But, enjoying my coffee. I'm not sure what kind of coffee you're having. Had a little bit of a burnt experience earlier in the day. So, confession, coffee's not always perfect. It's a science. It's a formula, but it's not 100% foolproof. And I had a little bit of a sort of a bitter taste going on. And what I worked out, it was actually the crema in the milk. And I'm not 100% sure what caused it, but I know I've had it a couple of times when I've been on the road and I've stopped at, say, the Wild Bean for a coffee. And sometimes that first taste, you just get a bit of bitterness in the foam of the milk on the top, and it's got. But what I find is if I notice that, then I can swirl my way into a decent mixture and avoid that by getting the real coffee that's underneath it. So look, that was a little bit of a distraction, wasn't it? Here we are. It's a horrid day. It's a glorious afternoon inside my office, and I'm wondering where you are in your journey, and I'm going to share with you where I am in mine. This is a series called Wrestling with God, and it's gone in all kinds of directions for me here. Obviously been podcasting this, and this is, I think, looking at my notes here, we're going to be about an 8-part, seven. We're going to have 7 or 8 episodes in this series, Wrestling with God. The series is drawn out of Genesis 32, where Jacob himself wrestled with God, and we're going to talk about that today. But also in my season, in my traveling, which I suppose is what's revealing to me so many different aspects of the story in the scripture, and also reflecting on how it affects me, because I was chatting with a mate recently. We had dinner together, and he's like, "Man, you've been podcasting a few interesting topics." And I said, "Well, prophetically, I sense that the Lord prepared us for a transition season." I was myself and so many others just seeing the hand of God preparing people for a season of transition. And so you can jump back and look at that season on the podcast channel. We then moved into a season of promotion, and my friend and I were talking about this and saying, look, I just sense that God is tapping people on the shoulder during this moment of transition, but He's prepared us for something more. And then lo and behold, knocked me down with a feather. The Lord must have been grinning from ear to ear, because here am I in a season of in-between, in transition, between one stage and the next, believing there's a promotion, and yet, if you've listened to episode 119, the story of in-between, you'll definitely understand that I'm in a place of limbo. Kathy, my wife, and I, we call it the land of limbo. And I've got to be honest with you, it is frustrating. It's something I've got to manage. I've got to manage the head space. I've got to manage the heart space, because I am prepared for transition and whatever the Lord has before me, but I can't see it. And so I've been podcasting it. I've been preaching it. I just released a new book recently called Hold Fast. And it's essentially me preaching to myself the necessity that we hold fast, that we cling to God in the midst of these times. And I'll make sure the link to that book is in the description. You can also access all my content on philstrong.com. So get yourself across there. The book is currently published only as an ebook and only available on Amazon. So the link will be in the description below. You can find it on the website. Get it. I've had a couple of people read it for the purpose of review and feedback. And the first comment was, dang, this is good. There's just so much juice and content that's helpful. There's some great lines in it that require some highlighting. But also I've made sure that there is devotional exercises, questions, prayers, scriptures, challenges at the end of each chapter. So look, the first person that read it was Kathy. She jumped through it and read it quite quickly because I'd asked her to get me some feedback, and she loved it as well. And she said, look, I need to go back and spend time on these exercises because the power of the transformation that's available in that book is, of course, in the ability one has to apply it to oneself. So anyway, that's enough about that. But there's so much going on. I preached the other day at my friend's church. He realized he had a double booking or a conflict in his schedule, and he texted me going, hey, look, I'm not sure. Can you preach? And I was able to go and do that because I haven't got much on my calendar. And just sharing some of my journey about this wrestling match that's going on to hold fast to God. And in that, I kind of went a different angle because I kind of don't like to get bored, so I don't preach the same thing too many times in a row. And just really felt to share them. What was Jacob fighting for? And in that, what are we fighting for? So let's my gosh, that was a long introduction. Let's get into the next part of the podcast. We'll just really reflect on where we've traveled in this season, this podcast season. We've spoken of the first episode was What is Your Name? And the second one, I really was reminding myself that to be strong requires us to be weak. We spoke about the power of persistent prayer, and we also focused last episode, most recently in episode 123, on what really is the ultimate prize that we're wrestling for here. And I say all of that to set you up for today because there's some things that God is speaking to us about. But we're on the home stretch. And one of the remarkable, I suppose, weird, geeky, cute things that I noticed in this story is that we have an opportunity to see Emmanu-el, and then we recognize that Jacob named the place Pen-el, and God then gives him a new name of Israel. And I noticed that. I don't know if you do, but that each of those words, Emmanu-el, Pen-el, and Israel, all end with E-L. And in the Hebrew language, E-L means God. It's a word for God. So there's Elohim, which is a more formal name for God. But often they're referencing God woven into their community in the way they name things. And so I was reading the story and doing a little bit of study, and I was like, man, God's everywhere in the story. So it's kind of like a little bit of a cute / geeky take on the story for me at the end of this series as we look to land it. We're coming down the home stretch, the last 3 episodes. Today we're going to talk about Emmanu-el. Next episode, we're going to talk about Pen-el, and finally at the end of it, we'll talk about Israel. And all of these will have specific keys for you as I reflect on my journey and you reflect on yours. So today, Emmanu-el, and if you've ever sung a Christmas carol, you'll know that Emmanu-el means God with us, and I'll get to that in the middle of the podcast. But for now, I want to go back in time. Let me tell you a story. So a long time ago, somehow, raised in a Christian home, visiting people from the church. Everyone's got these sayings and plaques on the wall. My mum had bumper stickers on her car that were embarrassing, but they testified to our faith. Anyway, I remember one day visiting a lady from church and having to visit the toilet and sit down for a period of time. So I must have had a delightful lunch, larger than my stomach could handle, and I decided to make room for afternoon tea. You get the gist of what I was doing. And so whilst I was sitting and pondering life, contemplating the world, I noticed on the back of the toilet door there was stuck a poster from the old Christian bookstore, and I recognized that poster because it held a poem that was quite close to my heart for some reason. I really liked it because I remember coming out and announcing to the family and our hosts, isn't it wonderful? On the back of the toilet door, there is a poem that is one of my favorites. Those were my words, one of my favorites. Like I'm probably 10, and I don't know that I had any other favorite poems, to be honest, except maybe something that Winnie the Pooh might have said. Anyway, my mum and dad took note of that, and so next year for my birthday, guess what I got from the Christian bookstore? I got a plaque for the wall. It had this poem emblazoned on it, and many of you will know this poem because it's called Footprints in the Sand. And I want to read it to you. I'll read it to you in a second. But the essence of this poem is pertinent to today's podcast and what I'm going to share with you because it speaks about God revealed in our story. Now, I've got a phrase that I use all the time about noticing the fingerprints of God. And what I mean by that is fingerprints are evidence that someone was there. So the fingerprints of God, to me, are signs that I notice that God is involved in my story. And the essence of God being revealed is a powerful revelation for us, but it's a revelation we've got to carry because the enemy will try and tell you that God has forgotten you and has abandoned you. And that is not true. Anyway, let's get to this very short poem. The poem is titled Footprints in the Sand and doesn't have an author attached to it. Here is the poem. One night, I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints. Other times there was only one. During the low periods of my life, I could only see one set of footprints. So I said, "You promised me, Lord, that you would walk with me always. Why, when I've needed you most, have you not been there for me?" The Lord replied, "The times when you have seen only one set of footprints, my child, that is when I carried you." And so my cute little plaque on the wall had, footprints walking up the page. And of course, in the middle of it, there is just one set. And it has always been encouraging me to know that God is with us. God is carrying me when I need carrying. And sometimes I joke, there's footprints in the sand and then there's these 2 tracks. And that would be when he's dragging me. When he's dragging me in the sand because I need to keep moving. Footprints in the sand reveals to us the power of our story in noticing that God is with us. He does not leave us. Emmanu-el means God with us. And I want to speak about that, beginning with the story of Jacob and then translating it to our story. Did I tell you I was having an amazing coffee this afternoon? I just stopped recording because I had to finish the cup that's in front of me, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm still enjoying it as the flavour runs around my mouth. The cup's empty, froth at the bottom, which I won't be digging into, but that was an exceptional coffee. So lucky for me. So with that distraction, let's go to Genesis 32. If you're following this journey, you'll know that we've been looking into the story of Jacob in Genesis 32. And it says in verse 22, a man came and wrestled with Jacob. Now, we just want to understand first and foremost, you will know this by now because you're a regular listener. You'll know this because of the title of the podcast series, Wrestling with God. This man who came and wrestled with Jacob is in fact God. It is a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. It's called a theophany, which is a manifestation of God in the form of a man, and that's as much as we know. But we know that because Jacob says, and we'll talk about this in a few weeks' time, is I have seen God. And we know that Hosea the prophet, recognized that Jacob in fact wrestled with God. So we know that God turns up. But it says in verse 22, a man came and wrestled with God, and it is implied, and this is the way I'm reading it myself, it's implied that Jesus initiated this encounter. Jesus approached Jacob, and Jesus started wrestling with him in the middle of the night. And so I'm reading that and I'm asking myself, why does Jesus initiate our wrestling encounters? I'm thinking about my situation. I told you many, many times over the past few months that, I was quite comfortable where I was. I was quite committed where I was. I have got a 30-year vision tracking into community transformation here and overseas. I had an exquisite time on the mission field downloading the strategy for the next season for the expansion of our ministry school in Indonesia. I had no idea that God was going to tap me on the heart and say, hey, time to move on. Jesus initiated this wrestling match for me. And so what is the reason for that? I've come to understand that we must confront that which must be transformed. And this is why I spent a little bit of time at the beginning reminding you of the journey we've been on. The first episode in the series, What is Your Name? Jesus comes to wrestle with us that we would confront any lack of clarity with regards to our identity. That's why I reminded you that we become strong when we become weak, because Jesus comes to confront us in our need for submission. Friends, the power of persistent prayer, we spoke about that because Jesus comes to confront us in our need, our transformation that's required in the area of faith. And finally, the covenant promise. Of course, Jesus wants to point us to that. So Jesus initiates the wrestling match because he comes into our world to force us, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, I don't mean it in a controlling sense, but he initiates because he absolutely desires that we would confront those areas of our lives that need to be transformed. And you have to understand, you have to accept that discipline feels like discomfort. I know when my dad disciplined me when I was a child, there was discomfort going on. Discipleship and discipline come from the same word, friends, and it's going to include discomfort. Why? Because Jesus knows what's best for us. He comes to confront that in our life which must be transformed. So if there's a lack of clear identity, a lack in the willingness to submit or walk in faith or understand the fullness of the promise, Jesus is going to force us to confront that. And then we find that it is God. And so this is where I want to segue to Emmanu-el. Because God with us is, in fact, the word Emmanu-el. It's found in Isaiah chapter 7. That's where the quote comes from for the Christmas carol that you might sing. And it's Isaiah the prophet, and it's called a messianic prophecy. And Isaiah says his name shall be called, and speaking of Jesus, his name shall be called Emmanu-el. And what I love about this, and I won't spend much time on this, but this is not because it's not a significant point. Friends, this is a major point. Emmanu-el means God with us. And what I want you to understand is the preeminent promise that we can take from this is, I will be with you. That in itself is worth the price of entry today. That is the preeminent prize, the promise that Jesus gives us, and his name shall be called Emmanu-el, meaning God will be with you. And what I love about the story of Jacob that I've been bouncing in and out of and sharing with you and buzzing out as I drink my coffee and read the scriptures and study it and look at it from different angles is Jesus comes to initiate the wrestling match. We've made that quite clear. Emmanu-el, God with us. He's coming to disrupt our comfort, to cause discomfort because he knows it's good for us, that he disciplines us and disciples us in order that we might be transformed. And in that, Jacob's wrestling with God. And they're wrestling with each other. And the man says, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." And Jacob replies. So I've got this vivid imagination, this picture going on that Jacob's got Jesus in this headlock and he's pressed him against the dirt and Jesus is like, let me go. And Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And this highlights something for us. Jesus holds the very blessing that you or I desire. By this point in the story, according to my studies, it is clear that Jacob had now worked out he wasn't just wrestling any old chap that came along in order to steal his family or his flock. He suddenly realizes he's fighting a divine creature being God himself, and he recognizes that God is the one who holds the blessing of the covenant. And I'm saying to you, and I'm prophesying to myself, Jesus holds the very blessing that you desire. And don't miss this, friends. The blessing becomes the key to our redeemed future. Come on, we got to dance around this. You got to listen to that again, because this is key. I just feel the Holy Spirit all over this moment right here. Jesus is holding the blessing that you desire, and that blessing will be the key to our redeemed future. So let me unpack that very quickly for you, because there's a few points I need to make before we finish. Look at Jacob. Jacob wrestles Jesus. He realizes he's God. He says, "I'm not letting you go until you bless me." Jesus says, "What's your name, friend?" He says, "I'm Jacob," saying, "I'm a deceiver." And you can go and unpack that in the first episode of the season if you haven't listened to it more than once. Jesus then says, "No longer will you be called Jacob, you shall be called Israel." And there he blessed him. And what I'm going to show you in the next two episodes is that is the key that unlocks the future, because he connects Jacob to the promise of Abraham. And I spoke about that in episode 123. So go back and refresh yourself on that. The point I'm making is this. You got to hang on to Jesus. You got to choose to wrestle Emmanu-el, who comes to be with you, because the blessing that you receive in the wrestling match is the key to your redeemed future. And Jacob walked out of that wrestling match. He walked with a limp, but he walked in to occupy the fullness of the promised land, the land of Canaan. And his descendants became numerous, and he fathered the 12 tribes of Israel in the land of Canaan, as God had promised Abraham, his grandfather. What does that mean for you and me? Well, here's what I've been processing this week. I will choose to behave in a way that will not forsake the promise of a blessing. So every morning when I get up, I'm like, I don't want to walk away from the opportunity to receive this key, this blessing that's going to unlock my redeemed future. I'm not going to forsake it. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to act in a way that would compromise it. I'm not going to allow my head or my heart. I shared with you at the beginning, I'm just getting frustrated. I'm waiting, and it hasn't actually been that long in the grand scheme of things. But it's still frustrating because I can't see what God has in store for me. And I've got to keep explaining it to myself and explaining it to others. And I sit here wondering where the future is, but I'm not going to forsake it. I'm not going to act in a way where I tap out or walk away. And the other thing is, and I take these points from the story of Genesis 32, I'm not going to let go even as the dawn breaks. I tried to study this and I couldn't find a reasonably accurate credible, let's say, answer to why Jesus says, let me go for the dawn is breaking. There's a whole lot of thoughts around that, but it's clearly symbolic because Moses takes care to transcribe it into the book of Genesis, the narrative, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So it's there for a reason, but I'm not going to pretend that I know what it means. But I just know it's significant. So if the dawn is significant, I'm not going to let go even though I see the dawn. All right? Because that's what Jacob did. Thirdly, so firstly, I'm not going to forsake. Secondly, I'm not going to let go even as the dawn breaks. Thirdly, I'm going to stay as close to Jesus as I can. But friends, hear this. This is in my several of my books that are coming out this week. I will not let go of him, even though he will not let go of me. And that doesn't become clear in Genesis 32 because Jesus cries out to Jacob, let me go, for the dawn is near. And Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go. But it takes two to tango. If you've ever watched wrestling, there's two people striving to hold on to each other. And the confidence that we have in Jesus is that he says, I will never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I will hold fast to you, says God, because I am faithful to my promise. And so I'm choosing not to forsake the promise. I'm choosing to not let go. But I'm confident, friends, that as much as I hold on to him, he can hold on to me. And finally, the fourth thing that I'm clinging to in this season, knowing that Jesus holds the blessing I desire, is I'm going to make my confession consistent. I'm going to make my confession consistent, and I'm going to say, he is the one who holds the blessing. So the one I hold on to, the one I pursue, the one I worship, the one I speak with, the one I spend time with, just the privilege and the pleasure of being with a friend. I was writing about this the other day, just spending time with Jesus, not for what he gives me or what I think I might get out of it, but the confidence that I can be with a friend because the blessing of being with a friend is more than enough. And I had coffee with a friend yesterday and she texted and said, hey, I'm going to pop in. I was like, great, coffee's on at home. She says, what treat can I bring you and Kathy? And I'm like, you don't need to bring a treat. Like, the joy is in the friendship and the connection. And I said that because I'd just been writing about it in context of Jesus and hanging on to Jesus and not letting go of who he is and what he carries in his love for me. So friends, what I want to say to us all, myself included, his name is Emmanu-el, God with us. And the preeminent promise is his presence. I will be with you. And I'm carrying that every single day. I'm reminding myself my confession will be consistent. He is the one who holds the blessing, and I will hold on to him as he holds on to me. So I don't know where you're at in your story. I don't know if you're going through transition or you're going through just a difficult season. Maybe you're feeling lonely. Maybe you're feeling downcast. Maybe you're feeling rejected. Maybe you're feeling lost. Jesus will approach you. He will confront the very thing in you that will be transformed by his grace, but he will hold on to you, friends. And I trust you remember that. Take care to hold on to him, for he is faithful. Hey, I hope that's encouraged you. I feel encouraged. I just give myself a pep talk for half an hour. This is amazing. Awesome. Maybe it's just the coffee buzzing around in my bloodstream. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and I look forward to being back with you real soon. Until then, you take care.